Welcome to the Bible Made Clear. I am here today with my friend Herb Butterworth, and what we are going to do today is we're going to talk about evolution mainly and creation. And what we're going to do is this is going to be the first of a few videos. So in this video, Herb is going to be the evolutionist atheist that as I ask him questions, he's going to respond. And the reason that we need to do this in the first video is we want to establish some definitions so that we have the groundwork for moving forward. So as we talk about evolution or natural selection or whatever it is that we get into, um, they're not they're not arbitrary definitions. They're definitions that Herb's going to put to it because he's going to speak as though he actually believes that stuff. So with that, you all ready to go, Herb?
Ready to go.
All right.
Ready to go.
All right, Herb, you evolutionist atheist, you. Um, so so tell me, what is evolution? How would you define that to us?
Well, we're going to be very careful here how we define evolution. It's important that we have an understanding as to what it is, because there are those that reject evolution. And I would say, and there are many that would agree with me in this, is that those that reject evolution just simply don't understand it. They don't have a grip on what it's saying. And evolution is kind of a broad term. We can speak about, the evolution of the universe, so to speak, or we can speak about the evolution of art in the 20th century, or, the evolution of any plans that we might have, vacation plans for the summer evolve over time as we discuss them. But I think for our purposes here, we're talking about Darwinian evolution, biologic evolution. And what that is in fact change over time. Very small changes in a population over time that over great periods of time can result in major changes. It can result from a prokaryotic cell, that is the simplest form of life that we know. It's a cell that doesn't even have a nuclear membrane. Over time, that one cell can divide and divide again, and having slight little variations over time can result in what we see today. All these different varieties of life, all the phyla, all came from that one thing, but very slow, gradual steps. And that's what we're talking about here. Now, how that happens is quite fascinating, quite a story to tell. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go, the process of evolution. And we can make sense of it. It's a well-studied, well-documented. I'm not even going to call it a theory. It's so well-documented. We know that this is true. We've applied the scientific method to it. We see it happening before our very eyes. And it has developed all these different life forms.
So
Is
let
that
me. So I have a question regarding what you stated. Um,
mhm.
so you believe that the simpler cell forms eventually turned into people.
Well, the way you put it there, the way that they turned into people, these simple, simple cells, simple life forms. I don't like to categorize it like that. Very small, incremental steps over a great periods of time. And yes, the cells themselves. Let's be clear about this. The cells themselves did not all of a sudden develop into people. Gradual steps over great periods of time resulted in what we see today, people included. Trees, any kind of plant, it's all from the same process.
So if that's the case, and there's evidence for that, can you give us an example of some place that is occurring where it could potentially be observed today?
Well, let me tell you this. We're not going to see a cell turn into a person, okay? As I said, it's a very slow process. It takes millions and millions of years for a new phyla to develop. What we do see today is we see evolution in action. We see changes within a species. It happens very slowly. We can see a species that gets cut off from its main group. It's in a different environment, and it develops differently. It has new traits. We can look at things like, let's look at dogs, long hair, short hair. We see dogs in warmer environments, and they tend to develop shorter hair. If they're in a colder environment, they have longer hair. We can observe these things happening. We can see bacteria resistant, or we can look at
Antibiotic resistant bacteria?
antibiotic resistance bacteria, and we can see how that happens over time. We can see a whole new generation come forth that has a resistance to the antibiotics. That's evolution. That's a very small step in evolution, but we can see how that over time would result in a greater change. In fact, over time, we can develop whole new phyla from that process. Now, to say, do we have evidence of that? Well, we don't have time. We don't have millions of years to look at that. We would, if we had that time period, we could look at that. If we could speed it up somehow, which unfortunately we can't. But we see enough to know that that's what happens.
So, are you saying that you're extrapolating what you do know to greater change?
We're extrapolating what we see, but we also have evidence of that extrapolation. We see comparative anatomy, for example, homology in different life forms. We see the similarities, and we know that certain groups, like we'll look at, okay, human beings and chimpanzees. We see the homology there, and we know that due to the similarities, they had to have had a common ancestor at one time, and they branched off. It doesn't make any sense to deny this. We see it. We see it in the DNA. We see every life form that's on Earth has DNA. That's kind of a smoking gun right there. So we know that we all share a common ancestor at some point. We'd have to go way back, but no, we cannot look back millions of years in the past or look ahead millions of years in the future and actually observe this. But we do observe it within our environment. We see evolution happening right before our eyes in very short periods of time. Now, these are just very small steps, but we know from that comparative anatomy, many other lines of reasoning and evidence that we see, that we know that this is the process that's taking place.
Now, do we have the common ancestor, or what is usually termed the missing link?
We don't. Are you talking about like humans and chimps?
Well, you're saying that basically chimpanzees or, apes went in one direction, humans went in the other from some common ancestor, correct?
Yes.
Do we have any evidence other than an assumption that the common ancestor existed?
Well, we do. We have, one of the famous ones that I'm sure you've heard of is Lucy.
Yeah, that was the
She
one
had characteristics.
found by Johannan.
Yeah, and Lucy has characteristics of both apes and humans. I think the pelvis was kind of a giveaway there. A flatter pelvis is more characteristic of human, and a pelvis that juts forward is, well, that's more characteristic of a human. The flatter pelvis is more characteristics of apes. And she had characteristics of both. So we would call that a transitional form.
Now
So
was
yeah, we do have that.
now the so a human being, Homo sapien, has the iliac blades pointing forward, right?
Yes, yes,
And
yeah,
Lucy's was flat, correct?
right. And that's why chimps, they kind of, they more waddle along as opposed to how the human stride.
So if so the iliac blades being flat were chimp blades.
Yes,
What was human
that's correct.
in Lucy then?
She had blades that were pointing forward.
But they when they were found they were flat.
You can, that's documented. You can go to any museum and you can see how her blades were pointing forward. That's pretty well documented, Scott.
Well, you know, I
That's
mean,
that's one of the things that's what caused the excitement, is that she had these forward facing pelvis.
they did have
And,
on the Omni program some years back. Aaron Lovejoy actually said that they had found them flattened because they believed the deer stepped on them and flattened them down, and he glued them back together facing forward because he believed that's how they should have been. Um,
well,
but we can leave that for a later time. But they were found flat,
I
at
think
least according to
that's
Lovejoy.
yeah. Well, that's quite an accusation. I mean, these are guys, they've dedicated their lives to finding the facts of these things, and they want to get to the truth every bit as much as anybody else. And to say that they would do something like that, I find
Well,
a little far fetched.
I wasn't saying that he had sinister motives. I'm just saying that on the uh, Omni program, he had said that when Lucy's hip blades were found, they were flat, but they knew that they needed to be human. So he showed how they could be reconstructed and glued together with a little bone removal and adjustment. So
He said, she said. Yeah, okay.
well,
Well, this is what we have. This is documented in the historical record that we have.
okay,
We have a transitional form in Lucy. So,
okay,
you
all
know,
right. Well,
I'm satisfied.
yep. No, I hear you. Okay, so, well, so I guess we could conclude evolution. In what you're saying is that um, they are pretty much what Darwin, I guess, had discussed in his Origin of the Species, that it would have to be multiple minor changes over long periods of time that would be uncovered to show the continual development from what would be a simpler cell into more complex beings, basically, and then eventually to what we have today. Would that be fair to say?
That's fair to say. Yep.
All right. So now one of the other things that
So you're expressing an understanding,
what's that?
right? I'd say that you're expressing an understanding of evolution.
Well,
You
I'm
know.
trying. Yeah, I'm trying.
Yep.
So now, based on that, I've read that the classic definition of evolution is natural selection. Would that be fair to say?
Well, I wouldn't say that's a definition of evolution, but that's a mechanism that's used, that we find in the evolutionary process. It's it's quite a thing, and it's a very logical thing when you look at it. And we understand it very well, and we also see that taking place in nature. It's the driving force behind evolution,
Can you
and what it
can you
is.
you're going to define that for us?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you what natural selection is. It's a It's a process by which those traits in an organism, or more correctly said, in a population, the traits that make it more survivable in a given environment are the ones that are selected. And what happens is that if a few of these individual organisms have this trait, they are more likely to survive in the population. And just the fact that they're more likely to survive, the chances of them spreading their desired trait is more likely because of their survivability. And if their likelihood of survivability is more likely, they're gonna spread this trait throughout the entire population over time. And the ones that don't have this trait are not as likely to survive, and over time they'll die out because natural selection is not favoring them. And this is how we see changes over time. That's the driving force behind it. It's an improvement in the species over a given amount of time. And we can see how this would happen over great periods of time, millions of years, how that can develop entirely new phyla.
That's interesting. So, are you saying that the environmental interaction with any kind of life form will change them at all, or just allow for certain traits to come out based on the environmental conditions?
Well, let's be really clear about this. The environment does not cause the change. The changes happen. We have mutations all the time. The changes happen, and they are selected by natural selection based on how likely would this change affect the survivability of the population. Evolution is not it's not an intelligent guided force. It has no end goal in mind. Things just happen. If blindly a change happens in the genome, and this blind change is favorable, making the organism and thus the population more likely to survive in a given environment, then yes, it is selected and would spread in time throughout the entire population. The environment itself, I want to be clear about this, the environment itself does not drive the changes. You know what I'm saying? Like, the changes just happen randomly all the time.
Well,
And
but
certain changes that are favorable are just neglected.
right. So essentially, if an animal needed longer fur to survive in a colder environment, then the longer furred animals would survive. Where if the same species had shorter fur, they would probably die.
Exactly. Now, let's be clear about that. You used a good example there. The longer furred ones in a colder environment are more likely to survive. So, if there is a change in the genome that would give longer fur, natural selection will select that just based on the fact that these organisms are surviving more readily than those in the same population that don't have the longer fur. They're surviving, and thus they're more likely to pass on this trait. The fact of the matter is that the same change could be for shorter fur, even shorter than what they have. But of course, they're not going to be selected because their survivability is less. Shorter fur in a cold environment is not helpful. It decreases the likelihood that this organism is going to survive. They're not going to survive, and the longer haired ones will. And that's all it is. So that's a good example of the environment is not causing the change, but the change is a result of the environment.
Now
You know what I'm saying?
yep. Now the information has to already be in existence in the DNA, correct?
Not necessarily. These random mutations just come about, and they're changes in what is already there. There's information in the genome, of course, and that information is passed on to the next generation and the next generation. But sometimes there's a change, and that change can be the thing that is selected. That change might be the difference, like the shorter hair, longer hair, like you just talked about. There may not have been any longer-haired creatures, but now there's been a random change calling for just it's an accident. It's just a mutation. A mutation,
So
being.
you're saying the random mutation enables the survivability.
Yes.
Okay.
And that random mutation, which is an oddity at this time, over time can become the norm.
Okay. And so how long does it take where we had talked about evolution being so slow that we can't really watch it change one species into another in the first question? Now, since it's so slow, how long would it take that life form before it normalizes the mutation so that it can actually survive?
Oh, there's a lot of variables in that. We can't give a specific time. It depends on the size of the population, of course. It depends on the environment that they're in. We got to be clear about this. Evolution is a two-way street. We're not always building upon and improving the organism. Sometimes we can go back the younger way. Based on all kinds of variables. It can take, it can be relatively quick. And when I say relatively quick, I mean within a few million years, or it can be much longer. We go through long periods of stasis where there's no changes at all. So to answer that question, you can't.
So
you can't do it.
So if a few million years is quick, wouldn't that be a long time for a necessary change for survivability to normalize a population?
Well, when we talk about something like that, yeah, it can take a long time, but they can be in an environment that is not necessarily just wiping them out. It's a beneficial mutation that makes it more likely for them to survive, but not necessarily critical for them to survive. So over time, these things can take place, and these mutations can catch on. Now, let's be clear about what a mutation is here.
Well,
Mutations,
that would be good as the next question. What is a mutation, and what role do they play?
A mutation is a change in the DNA sequence, for one thing. Now, when we think of mutations, we often have a negative connotation, and rightfully so, because mutations can be very damaging. What do we think of when we think of mutations? We think of, the dog with two heads and the, horse with three legs and things like that. Mutations generally are harmful, but not all the time. A lot of mutations, in fact, I'd say most mutations don't have any effect at all. They just drift through the population, or don't. They're just deleted. But even if they drift through the population, they're not making any changes at all. But every once in a while, you get a mutation that is beneficial. And these are the ones that will be selected by natural selection. And these are the ones that over time, this is where, we talk about long hair. And we have short hair, we have a mutation that comes about a long hair in a cold environment. Or no hair, yeah. Well, I guess we both know about that. And so the long hair benefit would be selected by natural selection and would spread through the entire population over time. Yeah, it can take millions and millions of years, or it can be, it can take a few million years, which in evolutionary timescales is a pretty short amount of time.
So am I to understand that once a mutation takes place and becomes normalized into the population over a great length of time, then that mutation needs to remain, and then the next mutation needs to build upon it. Is that correct?
If a mutation is beneficial to the population, it will remain. Doesn't necessarily have to, because as we stated earlier, we're not talking about a guided force. We're not talking about a force that has an end game in mind. Evolution doesn't sit back and think, how can I make this population survive better in this environment? It's not like that. It can be going along fine, and it's most likely that if there is a benefit that they're going to be selected just due to the fact that these organisms are surviving. And other ones that don't have that benefit are not as likely to survive. So over great periods of time, that mutation becomes mainstream, so to speak, in the population. A mutation does not necessarily sit there and wait for the next one to come along. It can be built upon. Once you have this mutation take place, if another mutation happens that can build upon that one, yes. But no, it's not just hanging around saying, okay, yeah, I got this, now let me just, add the next block on here. No, that's not how it works.
So these things are pretty randomized.
Very randomized. It's all random. Like I said, this is not a thought process. There's no end game in mind. It's a mindless, unguided force.
Can you give us some example evidence of beneficial mutations?
All right. This is a fairly common one. We have a population of lizards, and they're on an island somewhere. And they walk around doing their lizard stuff, and they see little insects, and they eat those, and that's how they survive. And a portion of this population of lizards finds itself in a cave on the island. They go into the cave. It's dark, but they're still finding things to eat. And there's little insects in there, and they eat those, and they're quite happy in there. But it's completely dark, and their eyes aren't doing them any good. In fact, the eyes become detrimental to them, because if they injure their eye, they can get infected, and then they die as a result of that. So having eyes is not a benefit. Being in the cave for some generations, one of them has a mutation, and this mutation leads to no eyes. They don't have them. That's a benefit to them. And because they're more likely to survive, because they're not going to have any injuries to their eyes in the dark, they'll pass this mutation on to others within the population within the cave.
So can I ask you a question?
That's a beneficial.
So
sure.
So based on the lizard example, though obviously it's hypothetical, nobody's actually seen that occur, correct?
Oh no, this has been observed.
They've watched lizards decrease their eyes.
We find lizards in caves separated from the main population that don't have eyes.
So the uneyed lizards don't walk into walls and cause injuries?
They're in the dark. They might walk into walls, might very well do that, but they're not going to damage. The eyes are an area on any living creature that has eyes. They're a vulnerable area, and if those get injured, which can very easily get injured, there's likely to be infection come from that, and that can spread, and it can be very detrimental. So if they don't have eyes, they're less likely to have that happen. Now, that doesn't mean that they aren't going to walk into a wall. No, but they're more likely to survive without eyes as opposed to with them.
Well,
because you see, the eyes aren't doing them any good.
Right. Yeah, they might as well shut them, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
they'd be better off shutting them.
Yeah. Um, so based on that, how about answering a question if I reverse it? So um, there are um, there are certain birds like hawks and such that can see, obviously from a great height, and when they dive down for their food, they're going at a high rate of speed. But what they've discovered is that their eyes have a film that prevents them from drying out. Like if you stick your head out the window going 60 miles an hour with your eyes open, they'll dry out pretty quick, right? If you don't have goggles
Yes.
on or something. And but hawks and the like um, that that dive down very fast to get their prey, their eyes, and falcons especially, their eyes have a like a heavy fluid that enables them to still see their prey until the last instant when their body turns and they try to grab it. But it prevents their eyes from drying out. Now, I'm assuming that you would say that that would be a beneficial mutation.
Yes.
Okay. So if that's a beneficial mutation, how did they eat for millions of years before that randomly happened?
Well, before they had the mutation that allowed them to do that, they still survived.
We just don't
But
know how.
having this mutation, oh, they survived basically in the same way. Maybe they weren't able to dive down from such great heights. Maybe this mutation allowed them to get higher up and see more and expand their population a little more because of their survivability. But before that, they still, they were still able to catch prey and eat and all that. But now with this mutation, it made them more likely to survive. They could outcompete those without the mutation.
So
And that's why this came about.
so why did only hawks and falcons and such get that kind of mutation and nothing else?
Do you have a need for that? Is that going to help your survivability?
Well, yeah, they didn't have windows on cars for a lot of years. They had to ride on
Well,
horses, right? For
fair enough.
you know.
But yeah, it wouldn't benefit us at all to have that, or many other animals. It doesn't. There's no benefit to that. And if we had the mutation, which we probably did at some point, have a mutation for something like that, it's going to be passed over by natural selection. It's not going to spread through the population because it's not aiding us at all in surviving.
But
We
those are
certainly
all,
can't run fast.
but those are assumptions, correct?
What's an
In
assumption?
other words, it's assumptions that we might or might not have had these different mutations over time, and they just kind of pass through the population.
Throughout the population, we have many, many mutations that are happening all of the time. Most of them we don't know anything about.
Well, if you
We were
don't know
talking about
anything
earlier.
about them, how can you know they're there if you don't know anything about them?
We see mutations. We we don't check into every mutation that comes along. Why would we do that? But we see mutations, and we can calculate a rate of mutations, and we know that most of them have no effect at all. All of us have mutations within us. We're not exactly a copy of our parents. That they were mutations, and what happened. What this is. Let's be clear about this. Um, what is a mutation? A mutation is, well, it comes about by cell division. And we can look back to high school biology and we remember mitosis. Mitosis is when you have a cell divide, making copies of itself. And during the process of that, we have these spindle fibers that come out and they grab onto the organelles and all that. And everything divides, and including the DNA. The DNA replicates itself. Well, very often when DNA replicates itself, there are copy errors. In other words, where you have an adenine, you might have a thymine put in or something like that. Most of these are very minor. And in fact, DNA has the unique ability of correcting a lot of those things, but not every one of them. Some of them go uncorrected. And then when the cell divides, it's not an exact copy of what it once was. There are errors in that, which is what we'd expect to find in a blind, pitiless process, which evolution is. It has nothing, there's no intelligence behind it. It's just a thing that happens in nature.
How
And
come it
so
gets
we have,
corrected then?
how can it get corrected?
Well, I mean, why is it being corrected if it's just randomly done? Is it random correction?
Just a benefit of evolution. A benefit of evolution. Over time, this has happened. It's just come about.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. We get into mutations and we talk about what they are, and we talk about DNA replication and how we see these mutations as a result of it. And every once in a while, although most of them are harmless, we get some that are very harmful, and we get some that are beneficial. And DNA in itself, not to change the subject or anything, but we look at DNA, and that is, you could say that's the smoking gun of evolution. Every life form there is has DNA, all based on the same thing. There we go. Common ancestor. How else can you explain that? Common ancestor. And I mean, it's proves possible. And you could say that evolution, they call it the theory of evolution, but we see something like that. We see the DNA that's within every living creature. We see homology. We see vestigial organs. Evolution's not a theory. It's a fact. It's,
Well, isn't a theory in
it's always
science?
backed by all.
Isn't something like evolution classified as a theory in science actually considered a fact? Doesn't it go from a hypothesis to a theory, and then that's where it sits?
Well, that's what I was saying. Evolution is considered to be a theory. It's called the theory of evolution, but I think there's so much scientific fact behind it. I think that to still call it a theory is kind of silly. It's almost like tradition. We call it the theory of evolution, and that's just what we continue to call it. Although all this scientific knowledge is just mounted up to where I don't think it should be called a theory anymore. I mean, some of the things we just talked about,
So I guess
comparing DNA sequences.
So the mutations, as well as the DNA corrections in the double helix, winding DNA chain, I guess those systems evolved into systems. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And it's just, we look at that and we're amazed by it. We look at it. But what does that tell us? That tells us the incredible power of this natural process. It's quite breathtaking, actually, that a natural process like that can, over great periods of time, small gradual steps, can lead to this incredible variety of flora and fauna, and it's just outrageous what we see out there today. And I can understand somebody saying evolution did all this and being just amazed by it, because it's amazing. It truly is. But I think science confirms this is the process by which all of this came about.
Yeah, it's certainly
I think it's
novel, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It is.
And but we have many fields of science, many institutions. They confirm all of this, and it's really quite a thing to observe. I mean, I think it's almost an undisputed thing amongst real scientists that any major university or college, this is what they hold on to, and rightfully so, because of some of the evidence that we've just talked about. We haven't even gone into great deal about it, but I think it's pretty well confirmed that this is it.
Well, you definitely seem pretty sure about it. So,
Yeah,
as a final question,
not without reason.
do you think there's any alternative to evolution?
Well, that's an interesting question. Is there any alternative to evolution? Um, I don't see any real alternative to it. And here's the important thing: there's no real alternative to it, but there's no need for an alternative to it because, as we just discussed, we have all the science behind it, observational science, the scientific method. We set up experiments and we find evolution to be true. And what we do need though is little adjustments to it. Maybe we can't. We're not at a point where we can answer every question about it, how things came about. We know, like DNA, we know that it came about through evolution, but we talked about, like, we can look at something like its ability to correct some of the mutations that happen. Fascinating stuff. How does that exactly happen? We're not sure about that yet, but we're working on it, studying it, and we will have the answers one day. And it's all going to be based on evolution. So as far as another alternative to evolution, no, I don't see one, but at the same time, there's no need for one.
Now, I'm assuming that you are a naturalist and you don't believe in God. Is that correct?
Um, I don't see the need to believe in God when we have this in front of us. We see evolution and how it works, what it's done. Uh, why would we need to invoke a God here? The scientific community as a whole, we're not going to look at things like that. We take we take science very seriously, and we decided, well, over the millennia, actually, we look at it and we say we have the ability to reason, we have the ability to understand, and we apply that, and we're doing a very good job of it. And what once was thought as a great mystery, we now have a very good understanding. I'm not going to say a full understanding. We have a very good understanding of it, and we really don't need to invoke magic tricks. We see a naturalistic process at work here.
Well, I think magic tricks may be a little bit overstating the case, but that'll be for another time. And I think that would probably wrap up you defining what evolution is, natural selection, mutations, and evidence, and your viewpoints on all that, and the fact that no God is needed for any of it, correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, science has shown us that. I'm just, Scott, I don't mean to offend anybody. People believe what they believe. But when we look at evolution, we have an understanding of evolution. We see that there is no need to invoke anything but naturalistic processes here. I hope this is clarified. I know we didn't go into evolution in great detail, but I think that anybody watching this would have a better understanding of what evolution is and what its claims are.
Right.
And that's the thing. We want people to understand what it is and what it's saying. We're not just pulling things out of the air. This is a very reasonable process that we've observed through scientific method. And I hope this has helped.
Well, it's certainly it's helped us understand your viewpoints on evolution and why you believe it and how you believe that it all worked and came about. So, thank you, Herb. You did a wonderful job. And now,
You're very welcome.
so for those of you who watched, um, if you were to have a discussion with an evolutionist without challenging, though I was biting my lip with a lot of the things, but that's basically what an evolutionist would be saying. In other words, if you were just to interview somebody to find out what is evolution. In other words, how do they actually understand it? I think Herb gave a really good representation of that. Now, this will be used as the basis for the next video in talking about some of the actually giving some challenges to it. We didn't want to do that really in this video, and I was trying to not do that, because in the next video we'll do it in a way that will be helpful. In other words, we're going to walk through some back and forth, and then show what a lot of times Christians say that enables the evolutionist to believe that the Christian's not really utilizing really the best responses to their challenges or questions, and then we'll do the ones that are better. But this was good for the first time, Herb. What do you think?
I think it was good.
All right. So anyways, until the next video, we appreciate you watching. I hope that you're learning, and may God richly bless you as you continue to study his word.